One day I had a home, the next I was sleeping on a bench invisible to the world, until strangers showed me kindness that changed everything. This is how my community saved my life when I had nothing left. It started with a knock on my door. The landlord standing there holding a paper, his voice tired as he said, "You're 2 months behind. I can't keep waiting." I tried to argue, tried to explain that I was searching for work, that my savings had vanished quicker than I thought, but his eyes were set firm and his voice steady. He had heard it before from others like me. I had been laid off from my job at the cafe. 3 weeks earlier, the owner apologizing, saying business was slow, that it wasn't personal. I had walked out with my final paycheck, barely enough to cover food and bus fare, certainly not rent. I sent out resumes every night, applied online, checked boards, nothing came back, no calls, no interviews, no chances. That night, after the landlord left, I sat on the floor of my apartment staring at the walls. They seemed emptier than before. The silence heavy, the thought creeping in that maybe this was the end of stability for me. I packed a few bags, clothes, toiletries, a small notebook where I wrote my thoughts because I didn't know where else to put them. The morning the eviction came, I felt numb. I carried my bags out into the street, the key no longer mine, my home no longer mine. People passed by without looking, the city kept moving as if I had simply been erased. The first night I slept on a park bench, wrapping my jacket tight around me, pretending it was enough. The sounds of cars and voices in the distance, both comforting and cruel, comforting because I wasn't alone, cruel because none of them stopped to see me. Days blurred quickly, hunger growing sharper. Each one my money dwindled until I was down to coins enough for bread, and water pride kept me from asking anyone for help. At least at first I told myself this was temporary, that tomorrow a job would come, tomorrow an old friend might call, tomorrow life might shift, but each tomorrow came and went, and I was still there, bag under my head, cold biting my skin. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold, it was the invisibility. People walked past me, eyes sliding away as if I was air. I wanted to scream, I'm still here, I'm still human, but my voice stayed inside, choking on shame. By the end of the first week, I had accepted it. I was homeless, not just for a night or two, but for as long as it would take, and I had no idea how long that might be. What would you do if you suddenly lost your home? The first week was a lesson in endurance, my body aching from stone benches, my stomach twisting with hunger. I learned quickly that sleep was not peace. It was broken fragments stolen between footsteps and sirens, every sound waking me with a jolt, heart racing, eyes scanning shadows. In the mornings, I walked aimlessly through the city streets, holding my bag close, as if it could anchor me. I discovered small corners where no one noticed me. Church steps, a bus stop far from the main roads. I found a public restroom where I could wash my face, brush my teeth, and at least look human for a while, though the mirror reflected someone I barely knew. Eyes, hollow cheeks, pale. Food was the hardest. The coins vanished fast. Bread rolls and cheap instant noodles bought at a small shop until nothing remained. I dug through pockets searching for forgotten change, and when there was none, I waited until hunger became a dull ache. One that never left. I noticed places where people left half-eaten meals, coffee cups on tables as they rushed away. I told myself I wouldn't sink that low, but by day 4 I was watching the trash bins, pretending I wasn't. Loneliness wrapped itself tighter than hunger. The city felt crowded, yet I had never felt so unseen. People passed close enough to brush my shoulder, but their eyes never touched me. I wanted conversation. I wanted someone to ask if I was okay, even a stranger, but silence answered every time. One evening, rain poured sudden and heavy, soaking me through. In minutes, my jacket clung to my skin, cold biting to the bone. I found an awning outside a closed store and huddled there, shivering, watching the lights blur through the downpour. I thought of my old apartment, warm and dry, the smell of coffee from the cafe downstairs, the small lamp by my bed. It felt like another lifetime. That night, a woman dropped a coin beside me without a word. It rolled against my foot, shining in the streetlight. I stared at it long after she disappeared into the rain. It was small, not enough to buy much, but it felt heavier than gold. It meant someone had seen me, even if just for a second. By the end of the week, my pride had cracked, survival pressed harder than shame. I began scanning faces, not for pity, but for chance. A chance at kindness, a chance at help, something, anything to remind me I was not invisible. Completely not forgotten, completely. The first week did not break me, but it stripped me bare, leaving only need and the faint flicker of hope that somewhere someone might see me, truly see me. Do you think most people notice the struggles of those around them? On the 8th day, I woke stiff and sore beneath the early sun, the city still half asleep. I walked slowly past a cafe window, watching people sip their drinks, the smell of coffee drifting through the glass almost unbearable. I stood there too long, hungry and dizzy, until a barista opened the door and called out, "Hey, you want this?" She held out a paper cup, steam rising from it. I froze, then nodded too quickly. She smiled and pressed it into my hand, saying someone ordered the wrong drink. I thanked her, voice cracking as if I had forgotten how to speak. I carried that cup like treasure, each sip warming more than my body. It reached deeper into something I thought was gone. Later that afternoon, I sat on the steps near the library when a student passed and dropped a granola bar beside me. No words, just a quick glance. I opened it instantly, the sweetness almost shocking my empty stomach. Grateful tears stung my eyes. I had not realized how close I was to breaking until that moment of relief. That night, I returned to the awning where I sometimes slept and found a blanket folded neatly against the wall. No note, no person in sight, just the blanket waiting. I wrapped it around me, inhaling the faint scent of laundry soap, wondering who had thought of me, who had cared enough to leave it behind for a stranger. These were small things, a coffee, a granola bar, a blanket. Yet they stitched something back together inside me. They reminded me that kindness still existed. Even if brief, even if wordless, I started to notice more. After that, a man holding the door open when my arms were full of bags, a woman nodding hello as she walked past a child smiling at me without hesitation. These little sparks pulled me through the darkness, each one a reminder that I was still visible to someone. For the first time since losing my home, I felt a shift inside. Not a solution, not a rescue, but a fragile thread of connection weaving between me and the world again. By the end of the 3rd week, I began to look for these moments, scanning not with desperation, but with quiet hope. Maybe today someone would see me again. Maybe today I could feel human again. These small acts were not enough to lift me out of homelessness, but they carried me through one more day and then another, and each day mattered. Each day meant survival, and survival meant there was still a chance ahead. Have you ever felt invisible in a crowd? The nights grew colder as the month dragged on. The blanket helped, but not enough. The ground seeped into my bones until every joint ached. I woke often shivering teeth, chattering, unable to will myself back into sleep. Hunger gnawed worse with each day, no longer sharp, but constant, dull, heavy, like a stone in my stomach. One evening, I wandered to the park where the fountain glowed under streetlights. I sat there staring at the water, rushing steady and calm. While my thoughts stormed inside, I whispered to myself, how much longer can I keep this up? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, cracked and tired. I wondered if anyone would even notice if I disappeared from this bench tonight. That day, my shoes split along the side, rain soaking through as I walked, my feet blistered raw. I tried stuffing newspaper inside, but it only made the pain worse every step. A reminder of how far I'd fallen from simple comforts, shoes, clothes, warmth, things I never used to think twice about now. Each one seemed impossible. I tried to push forward, but exhaustion grew heavier each hour. I skipped meals to stretch the little food. Strangers gave me my body shrinking weaker. I felt dizzy, often catching myself on railings, afraid one day I wouldn't be able to stand back up. Pride no longer mattered. I begged once outside a grocery store, holding up my hand to strangers. Some avoided my eyes. Some shook their heads. One man cursed at me to get a job as if I hadn't been trying, as if I hadn't lost everything. I wanted to scream back, but the words stuck instead. I lowered my hand and walked away, tears burning hot shame, pressing down harder than the hunger itself. That night under the awning, I curled into the blanket, knees pulled tight, chest heavy. I whispered to the dark, I can't do this anymore. I wanted anyone to hear me, but the city only answered with the sound of rain dripping from the roof. For the first time, I truly believed I might not make it through. I thought of the warmth of my old apartment of laughter, with coworkers of mornings when life had felt normal, and wondered how it had all disappeared so fast. I felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter with the slightest touch. But just as the despair sank deepest, something unexpected happened. A voice from the dark, soft and hesitant, asking, "Are you okay?" It startled me. I looked up to see a woman holding a bag, her eyes filled with concern. That was the night the breaking point became the turning point, though I didn't know it yet. What's the hardest sacrifice you could imagine making to survive? The woman knelt down so she was eye level with me. Her umbrella tilted just enough to shield me from the drizzle. She didn't look at me the way others had, with pity or with fear. She looked at me as if I was simply a person, someone worth asking about again. She repeated, "Are you okay?" And I tried to answer, but my voice caught the truth spilling instead. I whispered, "I don't know." She opened the bag she was carrying, pulling out a sandwich and a bottle of water. Pressing them into my hands, she said, "Eat first, talk later." I obeyed without hesitation, tearing the sandwich apart with shaking fingers that taste simple bread and turkey, but it felt like a feast, warmth flooding through me. When I finished, she asked my name. I told her slowly, as if the word might break in my mouth. She nodded, then told me hers, Maria. She explained she worked nearby and had seen me a few times under the awning. She said she kept thinking she should stop, but never did until tonight. Something told her not to walk past. We talked for a while, mostly her asking small, gentle questions, and me answering in pieces. She didn't push when I fell silent. She didn't look away when my eyes filled with tears. She just listened, and that alone felt like the greatest gift. Before leaving, she pulled a small card from her wallet and placed it in my hand. It had the name of a community shelter printed across it. She said they serve meals daily and can sometimes help with clothes or even a bed if you get there early. She added, "It's not perfect, but it's safer than here." And she smiled, telling me to try tomorrow. That night, I held the card like a lifeline, staring at the letters over and over until I memorized them. I still slept outside, still cold, still aching, but for the first time I had something concrete, a direction, not just blind wandering. The next morning, I followed the address Maria had given, walking farther than I thought I could, feet blistered, body heavy, but each step fueled by hope. I reached the building, a modest brick hall with a line already forming outside. Nervousness filled me. What if they turned me away? What if it was full? But when the doors opened, the smell of warm food drifted out, and a volunteer greeted us with a smile, guiding people in no questions, no judgment, just welcome. And in that moment, I nearly broke again. Not from despair this time, but from relief. That was the first day I realized community might be the thread that could pull me back up. Have you ever experienced an unexpected act of kindness? Inside the shelter, the air felt different. A mix of coffee soap and something warm like stew. People moved with quiet purpose, volunteers in bright shirts guiding us toward tables. My hands trembled as I carried a tray. The weight of real food, heavier than I expected. Mashed potatoes, bread, beans. Nothing fancy, yet every bite felt like healing. Around me, others ate, some silent, some chatting like old friends. A man across the table smiled and said, "First time here." I nodded, embarrassed, but he just shrugged, saying, "Don't worry, we've all had our first day." He told me his name was Carl. He had been coming for weeks after losing his job. He said the shelter saved him from sleeping on the street, and that the hardest part wasn't asking for help, it was accepting it when it finally came. After the meal, a volunteer offered me a chance to look through a clothing rack, everything sorted by size. I found a pair of sturdy shoes and a sweater, both a little worn but warm. When I slipped them on, I almost cried. My blistered feet finally cushioned again, my shoulders wrapped in something that felt like care. Later that afternoon, the shelter offered a corner with couches where people could rest, read, or just be. I sank into the cushions so soft. Compared to concrete, I must have dozed off, because when I woke, a blanket had been draped over me. Someone had noticed and cared enough to keep me warm. That night, I didn't get a bed. The shelter was full by the time I asked, but even leaving with a full stomach, warm clothes, and the memory of kindness felt like a victory. I curled under the awning again, yet the world felt slightly different, softer. Over the next days, I returned each morning, sometimes for food, sometimes just for conversation. Volunteers greeted me by name. One woman, Emma, asked how I was holding up each time. Her voice genuine, never rushed. She reminded me that people still saw me not as invisible, but as someone worth asking about. The other guests shared their stories too. One had fled an abusive home. Another was saving for a deposit. After medical bills took everything, one older woman carried a small notebook like mine, filling it with poems she read aloud softly. Her words like light in the dimness. I realized I was not alone in my struggle. Pain wore many faces, but kindness bound us together. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest seed of belonging. Not a home, not yet, but a circle of strangers who understood what it meant to lose everything and still hold on. Community was no longer just a word. It was hands passing plates, shoes waiting on racks, blankets draped over shoulders. It was proof that even when the world seemed cruel, there were still people choosing to be gentle. Do you think community support is stronger in small towns or big cities? The days at the shelter began to give me rhythm again. Mornings meant food and coffee. Afternoons meant searching for jobs. Evenings meant returning to whatever corner I could find to sleep. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like structure. And after weeks of chaos, structure was a gift. One volunteer named James asked if I wanted help making a resume. I hesitated, embarrassed. I had nothing impressive to put on it, just cafe work. Odd jobs here and there, but he said every skill matters, and together we typed it out on an old computer in the corner. When I held the printed copy in my hand, I felt stronger, as if I existed again on paper, not just as someone lost. The shelter also kept a bulletin board full of local postings, jobs, rooms, available services offered. I checked it every day, circling numbers in my notebook. I called when I could, using the shelter phone. Sometimes no answer, sometimes rejection, but at least I was trying again, each call a step away from despair. One afternoon, Emma handed me a small voucher. She explained the shelter partnered with a laundromat, and I could wash my clothes there for free. I almost cried when I pulled my damp clothes from the dryer later that evening. Clean fabric against my skin made me feel human again, dignity stitched back into me with every fold. Slowly, I started to talk more with people around me. Carl introduced me to a group that gathered at the park on Sundays to share food. Not from an organization, just neighbors bringing sandwiches, soup, bottles of water. I joined them one week and felt warmth in my chest as strangers handed me food and asked about my day, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The hardest part was letting myself accept this kindness without guilt. My pride still whispered, "You should do this alone." But my heart knew I couldn't. And maybe that was the lesson, that sometimes survival meant leaning not only on yourself, but on others too. By the third week, something shifted when I looked in the mirror at the shelter bathroom. I didn't just see hollow eyes anymore. I saw someone still standing, someone fighting, and that realization was powerful. Recovery wasn't complete, not yet. I still slept. Rough many nights, still carried the weight of fear about the future. But the difference was now, I had tools, allies, a fragile but real net around me holding me up when I staggered. For the first time, I believed there might be a way out, not tomorrow. Not easily, but step by step. Would you accept help easily or struggle with pride? At first, I only listened at the shelter, others sharing stories around tables, words spilling like confessions of nights and alleys, of lost jobs, of families left behind. I sat quiet, afraid my own voice would sound small. But one evening, Carl nudged me gently, saying, "Everyone has a story, you should tell yours too." So I began halting at first, my words stumbling, but once they started, they did not stop. I told them about the cafe, the eviction, the first night on the bench, and the feeling of being invisible. The group listened. No interruptions, no judgment, just quiet nods and soft eyes. And when I finished, the woman with the notebook said, "Thank you for trusting us." Her voice calm but heavy with meaning. Speaking out felt strange but freeing, as if I had been carrying stones inside me and one by one setting them down. I realized my story mattered. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was mine, because it was real. Soon I spoke more, not just in the shelter but outside too. I began greeting volunteers by name, thanking them, asking about their days. I smiled more at strangers on the street. Even when they didn't smile back, it felt important to keep trying to reach outward. Emma noticed. She said, "You're different now, brighter somehow." And I laughed, telling her I didn't feel brighter, but I supposed maybe surviving itself was a kind of light. One afternoon, a local reporter visited the shelter, writing an article about the growing number of people without homes. The staff asked if anyone wanted to share their experience. My heart pounded, but my hand lifted almost on its own. I told the reporter what it was like to feel erased, then to be seen again by acts of kindness. I told her about Maria, the stranger with the sandwich, and about the blanket that had appeared when I needed it most. Later, I worried, had I said too much, exposed myself too openly. But when the article was published and I saw my words in print alongside others, I felt something shift. I wasn't just a nameless woman on a bench anymore. I was a voice, a person with a story that might touch someone else. That night, as I lay under my blanket outside, I thought about how silence had once nearly broken me, how shame had kept me hidden, and I realized that speaking, even trembling, speaking had stitched me back together. Finding my voice did not end the struggle, but it gave me strength. It gave me identity again, and maybe it would become the bridge to something bigger. What's the most powerful way to give back to someone who helped you? After the article was published, things began to shift in ways I hadn't imagined. Strangers at the shelter said they had read my words and felt less alone. Volunteers stopped to tell me my story had moved them. One woman even pressed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me to care." I carried those moments like light inside my chest. A few days later, Maria appeared again, the same woman who had first given me a sandwich. She smiled when she saw me at the shelter, saying, "I knew you'd find this place." She told me she had read the article too, and felt proud, like she had been part of my journey. Somehow she handed me a flyer for a community center nearby. They were looking for part-time help. She said answering phones, helping with events. Nothing glamorous, but a start. I held the flyer carefully, afraid it might vanish. If I looked away that evening, I sat under my blanket reading it over and over, whispering to myself, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the chance I've been waiting for. The next morning, I walked into the community center. Shaking my knees, the woman at the desk asked if I was there about the job. I nodded and handed her the resume. James had helped me make weeks ago. She smiled reading it, then asked me a few questions, simple ones about answering phones, greeting people, helping with schedules. I did my best, voice steady even when my heart thundered. 2 days later, I got the call. I had the job only 10 hours a week at first, but it felt like a doorway opening. I cried when I hung up, clutching the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Not from despair this time, but from joy. With the job came small but steady changes. The shelter helped me set up a bank account. The community center gave me a staff badge, and for the first time in weeks, I had somewhere to go each morning. Somewhere that wanted me, needed me. When I answered the phone and said, "Hello, this is the community center," my voice felt sure as if I belonged there. People at the shelter cheered when they heard Carl clapped me on the back. Emma hugged me. Maria smiled wide and said, "See, I told you." And for once, I believed her. The turning point wasn't just the job, though. It was the way my community kept showing up around me. Strangers and friends, volunteers and neighbors weaving a net beneath me so that even if I stumbled, I would not fall as hard again. For the first time since losing everything, I began to imagine a future, not just survival, but life. Do you believe kindness can rebuild a life? The first paycheck was small, but when I held it in my hands, I felt powerful. I walked straight to the shelter office and asked for help finding a room. The coordinator smiled and said, "We'll do our best within a week." They connected me with a shared apartment, 2 other women already living there, rent low enough that my hours at the community center could cover it. When I carried my bag into that small room with a real bed, I sank down onto the mattress and cried soft, grateful tears. I had not realized how much I missed the feeling of walls around me, the safety of a door I could lock. The job grew too. The director at the center noticed my effort, how I showed up early, stayed late, learned quickly. Within 2 months. She offered me more hours, steady work enough to not only pay rent, but also save a little. Each week, I bought a secondhand coat, good shoes, groceries of my own. Each item proof that life was no longer just survival, but recovery. I still visited the shelter sometimes, not for food now, but to volunteer. I served trays, smiled at new faces, told them you are not invisible. I know because I was here once too. Carl eventually found work at a warehouse. The older woman with a notebook published her poems in a small community paper. Emma kept volunteering every week, still greeting everyone by name. One afternoon, Maria stopped by the center. I hugged her tightly, whispering, "Thank you," over and over. She laughed, saying, "You did the hard work yourself," but we both knew the truth. She had been the spark, the first stranger to see me when I was invisible. And I would never forget that standing at the community event weeks later, I looked around at neighbors, volunteers, families, laughter echoing through the hall. I realized this was what community meant. Not just meals or shelter, but people lifting one another up until hope was possible again. Homelessness had stripped me bare, but my community had rebuilt me piece by piece, not into who I was before, but into someone stronger, someone who understood that asking for help was not weakness, that kindness could be powerful enough to save a life. As I walked home that evening, key in my pocket, dinner waiting in my shared kitchen, I whispered to myself, I survived, not because I was strong alone, but because I was never truly alone, even when I thought I was. This was not just an ending, it was the beginning of a new life, one built on gratitude, one rooted in hope, and one forever shaped by the kindness of strangers who became my community. What lesson do you think this story leaves behind?